Welcome into an all-new betting preview for this week's Travelers Championship. I'm Rick Gaiman, that right there, Andy Lack. Andy, hello. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday, man. Are you back in Las Vegas?
We're in Orange County right now, but I'll be back in Vegas tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay. So wrapped up everything at LACC. Do you have any big picture takeaways before we dive into Travelers of our third major of the year?
I would just say that in general, what happens online is not reflective of what happens on a golf course. I think that a lot of the Discord that I read, I was pretty much there was like no service out at LACC, so I was pretty much off Twitter the whole time, which was great. The Discord that I was catching up on of the golf course being too easy or something, like it is a fine needle to try to thread, I suppose, where if things were if things were over par, I think you'd be hearing people saying, oh, it's too difficult, we want to see these guys make birdies. So I essentially do not care what the winning score is going to be. We got a phenomenal leaderboard at a really cool golf course, and though I would have probably preferred a more exciting like Ricky win, a Scotty win, a Rory win, Wyndham Clark, if it was not going to be one of the big names, Wyndham Clark is a guy who has elevated himself to such a different level of golf this year that I think it's well-deserved.
Yeah, we landed the same boat here. And I can tell you from texting with a couple members over the last day or two, they're completely oblivious as well, and feel that this U.S. Open was a resounding success, as does the USGA, who made out like bandits as well. I mean, imagine being in a situation where you make so much money off of corporate boxes that you don't even really have to sell tickets. So I agree. I think this was a good week to kind of get a bit of a reality check on how certain people on the internet are reacting to things, how certain people in positions of more influence when it comes to deciding where these tournaments end up and deciding how these tournaments play, react on certain things. And at the end of the day, I think there were a lot of positives and negatives from this US Open as a venue, right? Being on the course, we got to see each other on Saturday. I was all there all day Saturday. There are some topographical challenges to this golf course that make it somewhat difficult of a viewing experience for a fan in general admission. It seemed a lot better if you were median inside the ropes to be able to navigate it. And I'm sure the people in corporate press boxes probably had themselves a fine experience as well. But I think a lot of the criticisms that people were throwing out there in terms of the atmosphere were very fair, not the golf course architecture's necessarily fault. But overall, I'm very curious to see where the US Open goes from here in terms of the venue selection, in terms of what its identity should be. Right. And, we got guys firing 62s on Thursdays, and we're selling hats that say grit in the pro shop. I think there's a ton of meat on that bone, and it's kind of fascinating to dissect where the US Open is going in the future. And really the polarizing discourse that we saw all week, I thought was a really interesting, and I know very controversial, discussion as the week got on that I found quite fascinating.
Well, I think we're headed back to LACC in 2039. So 16 years from now, we'll be back at LACC, and a lot of the venues are already laid out between now and then, and of course into the future. So we'll see. It's always kind of easy to be a prisoner of the moment, and I think if we look back in a couple of weeks, couple of months, and start having discussions again, we'll see where we land. But it's about 3,000 miles across the country for this week here, Andy, and we're headed to the Travelers Championship. It's an elevated event. A lot of the guys are making the trek. This is our final elevated non-major, non-playoff event of the year. It's TPC River Highlands, which is one of the more unique courses on the PGA Tour schedule, especially in terms of its distance or lack thereof off the tee, but a couple of ways that they are able to keep this from being 30 under par. So let's set the stage for the types of golfers that might be able to have success on this golf course.
Yeah, I mean, this is a golf course where we've seen all types of players succeed. We have seen showdowns between Brendan Todd and Dustin Johnson coming down the stretch. We saw Bubba Watson and Corey Pavin in a playoff here before. So I don't know if there is a defining identity that necessarily is more primed to have success here than other identities. I think this is a bit of a smorgasbord in terms of what I'm looking for. I think that this is an underratedly tough course around the greens. I think that you want to be really, really strong between 125 to 175. There's a massive, massive plurality of those short to middle iron approach shots and a very small plurality of approach shots from 175 yards plus. We've heard Bubba Watson. I included this quote in my article, but Bubba Watson went through hole by hole and said, wedge, 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 wedge. So you're going to want to be very strong with those short to middle irons. And even if you're not as long as Bubba Watson, shorter players are still going to have their fair share of wedges and short irons on this course as well. Driving accuracy is pretty important here because of the lushness of that rough. I grew up playing golf courses like this and went to boarding school right down the road from TPC River Highlands. It can get pretty thick and sticky if you're missing the fairways, but on a golf course this short, if you have some length, then you're just chopping out wedges out of there anyway. So to me, this is a conglomeration of a lot of skills, and I'm not necessarily ruling anybody out if they are poor in one area of their game, because this is a golf course that allows you to make up for it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think there's what's interesting is that there are a lot of options, right? So like if you just want to yank driver on every single hole, like have at it, right? If you want to take a different approach, you have that available ability to do that as well. And it is a Pete Dye design that's, the winning score, unlikely to probably be like 25 under par. I wouldn't call it a complete birdie fest considering the 6,800 yards on the scorecard. Maybe that 16, 17, 18 is much more natural for where the winner is going to end up. And if you start looking at, the odds board, Andy, which is right here, this is via Odds Checker. This is a grid where you can compare the odds at different books. It's still Scotty Scheffler's world, and everybody else is just kind of living in it. Scotty at 6.5 to 1. With John Rahm at 12, along with Patrick Cantlay and Rory McIlroy, Xander Schauffele at 14, and they make up the big five for this week that are sub 20 to 1.
Yeah, so coming off majors this year, we've gotten Matt Fitzpatrick and Emiliano Grillo. I do think that there is, just like you and I have hangovers from these weeks, just sitting in an office doing podcasts all day. You probably have to imagine that some of the players like Scotty Scheffler and Rory McIlroy, who were in contention to win this tournament, may have a little bit of a hangover this week, especially when you combine that with the travel spot of this. I mean, I know that, we'll play a very small violin for these guys flying privately from the West Coast to the East Coast. But I was surprised, and I know the PGA Tour doesn't really have control over where the USGA goes, so it's not necessarily all their fault in terms of the scheduling. But this is a somewhat of a surprising choice for an elevated event. With that being said, the Travelers is deserving of that. This is a tournament that fans show up for consistently year after year. This is a part of the country that is far more sports starved than a Los Angeles, where if their teams aren't doing well, people will just go to the movies or the beach. So I'm excited for the Travelers Championship. I think it is deserving of having many of the best players in the world return there. If I'm talking about the top of the board, I'm probably more inclined to look in the direction of a Cantlay, Hovland, or Morikawa that maybe had a bit of a less strenuous 4 days at LACC than a Scheffler or a Rory or a Xander. And as much as Cantlay frustrated me last week being on him at the US Open, this is a sport where you have to you have to be able to not hold grudges. And I think this is a pretty appealing spot for a guy like Patrick Cantlay, who remains the best bent grass putter in the world over a 3-year sample size, who is now traveling to a golf course where it's more likely that he's going to have to get to 19, 20 under par, who's had a resounding amount of success, as you have up on the screen, not just at the Travelers Championship, but also on shorter Pete Dye golf courses. So he would probably be my preferred option at the top of the board.
5 consecutive top 15 finishes for Patrick Cantlay at the Travelers Championship. And outside of a slow start, the US Open, he kind of comes back and at least adds, a T14 to the resume, now 5 straight in majors. When I look at this board, and a couple of things kind of stand out, it is a pretty sticky course history. So finding these guys that have played here and have played well is at least a little bit more important than I think in other weeks. So Cantlay is at the top of the list. I'm curious about Xander here, our defending champion at 14-1, who was phenomenal through 2 rounds last week and really only had like that Saturday round. I mean, he lost it. He just lost the stroke. He didn't have it. He had one of the worst driving performances of his career, and he quickly bounced back. I don't know what is going to happen on hole 66, 67, 68 of this championship. I worry a little bit, even though he closed it out last year. But I kind of feel this desire to get right back into the Xander category.
Yeah, I mean, people forget that coming off of disappointing major performances, and it's really difficult to call a T10 at LACC disappointing, I think, based off the fact that you start with a 62 and are -8 after 1 round and finish the tournament at -3. I think Xander himself would be the first to tell you that this was a pretty resounding disappointment over the weekend. I don't know how much you caught of his Saturday round, but that was such a shocking, like, out of bodily round for him in terms of the way that he hit the ball. It looked like he woke up on the wrong side of the bed or something was going on there. And he looked a little bit more like himself on Sunday, but it seems like there was a bit of a shock factor that happened to him on Saturday over the weekend. And he spent a little bit of Sunday having to pick up the pieces. And that was really where he shot himself outside of being able to actually win this golf tournament. But the guy was one of the favorites at Brookline last year and ended up finishing T12 or T14 or T10 or something like that, and kind of came back the next week after disappointing a lot of people as in the betting markets and as a popular DraftKings play, and ended up winning the tournament. This is undeniably a good golf course for Xander. I've always liked him on this agronomy. He's starting to pile up a pretty damn good resume on these Northeastern bentgrass courses. So I agree. I mean, I'd still give his close friend Cantlay a bit of an edge here, in my opinion, in terms of where I would want to go with an outright wager. But I think Xander is absolutely live. And we've seen these back-to-back winners a lot more than I'm used to. I used to usually count out defending champions, but because I've just believed it's hard to go back to back. But we've seen Sam Burns kind of crack that mold a bit more over the last 2 years. So yeah, I think Xander's as live as ever. I wish I still had him in some one and done options for sure, because I think it's a good spot at somewhat appealing probably ownership.
Yeah, I saw every shot he hit on Saturday because he was playing with Rory, and it was bizarre because he was so incredibly bad, but it could have been a lot worse. He leaves a couple in the bunker on the first hole, still makes bogey. I think he got through number 2 with the kind of a par that he didn't deserve after yanking one left off the tee, yanking one left on his approach shot, making a long putt. I mean, this thing actually could have been a lot worse. And then statistically, you look at the bounce back with the driver immediately on Sunday, gives me at least enough room for optimism there. So that's the top of the board. The middle section is a couple of those names you mentioned earlier: Victor Hovland, Colin Morikawa, 20-1, 25-1. Fleets is in here. Tommy Ladd, 33, alongside of Tom Kim at 35. What's that kind of secondary tier look like on your thing?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of understandable love for Tom Kim and Tommy Fleetwood, both coming off fairly strong performances at the US Open, particularly Tommy, who fired that 63 on Sunday and had such an incredible ball striking week. A lot of that was done on Sunday, but I think he gained like over 12 strokes ball striking at the US, his best ball striking performance since I think the fall. So I understand the love for Tommy. I would probably more so still lean in the direction of some value on a Tony Finau at 35 to 1, right? I mean, this is a guy that was 35 to 1 at the US Open last week. He didn't play poorly at the US Open. He actually gained over 5 strokes on approach at the US Open, which falls in line with the idea that he's been a top 5 iron player in the world this season, right? And we've seen him on somewhat easier courses. I mean, I think this is a great golf course for him. He's had a lot of success on this agronomy. I've always liked him on this agronomy. I've liked him in the Northeast. He's won at courses like Liberty National in the past. I have no concerns or doubts about him showing up in, these tournaments with still very good fields, but feel a little bit of a smaller stage. And I just found the value on Finau at 35 to 1 to be the most appealing middle tier option for me. But there's some other good names in here. I mean, is there anyone else that has your attention?
Yeah, I've made 2 bets thus far. Colin Morikawa, Hideki Matsuyama.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two, 25 and 45, I think I got on Hideki. So the Collins stuff is sick. He's back, right? The 1 to 1.5 strokes gained approach per round is exactly what you're looking for. He is going to pepper fairways. He's going to be very, very accurate, and you're going to hope to find a good putter in which he has gained strokes putting in 3 of his last 4. I mean, the kind of flying under the radar that I think Colin has done is incredible, considering that he withdrew from the Memorial 2 shots off the lead. I mean, there is like if he wins that tournament, he's uber popular at the US Open. He finishes T14. No one crushes him for that. And he's one of the most popular guys for this week. And he's one of the favorites, right? Like he is not, we're not that far off from a timeline in which Colin gets it done at the Memorial. Then Hideki, I just think too far down the board for a guy who is gaining 4 to 8 strokes on approach every single week. I've got questions about what he might do off the tee. I've got questions about what he might do with the putter, but his around the green play is elite. And this is just too long.
I agree. I think that, Hideki always struggles to get the respect that I feel that he often deserves in the betting markets. This is a guy time after time on DraftKings too, that you can generally find some value on. I love the way that he's playing. You look at those approach numbers, and Hideki's had an incredibly solid season. He obviously hasn't had that big breakthrough win that I think many were potentially hoping for, but I love the way that he's hitting his irons right now. He remains one of the top 5 short to middle iron players in this entire field. So I think you're catching a great number on Hideki. Any love for some guys that may have disappointed at the US Open, but you're able to catch a bit of a discount on now? I'm talking about guys like Max Homa, Sung J M, and then of course, we have to have Jason Day. You could also put in that category Corey Connors as well. We just have to spend 30 to 45 seconds on Justin Thomas, even though his play probably doesn't deserve that right now.
So Homa, I'm not super interested in, because I think he's been playing better than some of those other guys. Like I think he's been playing better than Justin Thomas. I think he's been playing better than Sung J M, but he's been pretty horrible around this place, which has me concerned for a second. So I'll probably just take a pass there. Justin Thomas, he was pretty candid about like how disgraceful his game was and how embarrassed he was by it. And he is kind of this back against the wall golfer, but I'm not sure that there is a switch that he can just flip. So again, probably not going to get there on Justin Thomas. The Sung J one is so bizarre that I'm almost interested, if that makes sense, right? Like I'm not sure that I can believe that Sung Jae is just playing this bad. Three cuts in his last 4. The ball striking hasn't been particularly good. Remember, the week before the PGA Championship, he won a KPGA event, and since he came back from Korea, he just hasn't been able to put it together. This is more of a mystery to me, and I'm actually more inclined to buy the mystery because it's not as clear why he isn't playing as well right now.
Okay, so I agree with you. I think if we're grouping those four into a category, if we're talking about Max Homa, Sung J M, Justin Thomas, Jason Day, and looking at all of their current values in the betting market, I would prefer Sung J the most. I would probably make a bet on Sung J before the other three. What's your buying number on Justin Thomas at this point, right? Like, what is the number that he would have to be for that to start tickling your interest? Is it 80? Is it 100?
I think we're pretty close to it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so he's as short as 45. He's as long as 60. I think we are getting pretty close to it. I just also am not. I'm not at auto bet territory with Justin Thomas yet, like I have been at Rory. Like sometimes when it's like Rory and he gets to 20-1, it's like, this is stupid. The guy has a literal historic win rate in the world of golf. Justin Thomas, I mean, this is to me, it's longer than 2 weeks or 4 weeks. This is like a year or 18 months of him not being the Justin Thomas that we expected. So it's hard for me to be like auto bet in that world. And I mean, I get, so it's hard for me to put a number on it, but I think we're getting pretty close to it.
You know what confuses me a lot is that athletes that are usually hurt, LeBron James is the king of this. If an athlete's usually hurt, what is the benefit of playing poorly when you're injured and getting all this heat and then not telling people that you're hurt? I mean, if the guy is hurt, which there have been reports of, nothing really substantiated, right? We haven't had him come out and say that he's battling some sort of injury, and he hasn't changed his schedule at all either, which is why I've probably been hanging on to him for a bit too long. I mean, I didn't bet him at the US Open, but I bet him at the Memorial, and he was a prominent feature in my DraftKings core at the US Open as well. And it was probably a fool me once situation where I should have seen the writing on the wall and hopped off the train a little bit earlier. But the reason why I did it was not only has he been dead silent on the idea that maybe there might be something going on with him physically, but his schedule hasn't changed at all. In fact, he's committing to golf tournaments like the Rocket Mortgage a couple weeks ago, right? So if he is hurt, why is he committing to go places like Detroit? And why is he just shooting 81s on the world's biggest stage and not being transparent about the fact that he may have some physical limitations going on right now? That whole aspect of the Justin Thomas situation that we're in right now is probably the most confusing to me.
Yeah, it's a bizarre situation. Longer than that. So I've got 2 bets in. I will probably find myself on a Corey Connors at 80-1 just because of accuracy, wedge play, and let's see if we can replicate Texas Open from a couple of weeks ago. He's not that far removed from a victory. I might go to battle with those 3. The guys that I like lower than this, Andy, like Austin Eckroat at 100-1, who's playing great golf, Ludwig Aberg, who I'm a believer in long term. These are guys that Mark Hubbard for that matter. These are guys that I will get access to in other places, whether it's Jock Market, whether it's matchups, whether it's finishing positions, but I might just go to battle with 3 guys this week.
Yeah, I'm pretty much at the top of the board as well. I think my 3 guys are going to be Cantlay, Finau, and then one of Hideki or Siwoo. But in terms of some longer shot options that I don't know if I have a tremendous amount of confidence for them to win the golf tournament, but I do think that they're very appealing guys to keep your eye on, both in DraftKings and the top 10, top 20 markets. CT Pan's playing some incredible golf right now. He's got back-to-back top 5 finishes with some really strong ball striking and has a really strong history of success on a lot of these shorter positional golf courses, be it Sedgefield, be it Harbortown. You mentioned Mark Hubbard. I'm a huge fan of that play as well. Hubbard's hitting the ball really, really well with his irons, and this is undeniably the type of golf course that Hubbard should be licking his chops for, right? Hubbard's probably the type of guy that is going to have a much more difficult pathway to success at longer golf courses like Torrey Pines. You bring up Tom Hoagie as well. I mean, Tom Hoagie is the guy who is live at any short positional golf courses with a massive plurality of shots inside 175 yards. He remains a top 5 to 10 mid to short iron player in this field, and you're getting a pretty good buy low opportunity on him. I mean, the market, the market is pretty down on Hoagie right now. So I think any of those options, even a guy like Bezadenhout, who I've bet at far more embarrassing numbers than 250 to 1, is a guy that I think is still actually hitting the ball well, should love a golf course like this, and you can find a bit of value on this week as well.
Okay, so as I transition us to, I want to start at the bottom here for the matchup, because those guys that I mentioned, like Ludwig Aber gets even money against Eric Cole. I'm a fan of Eric Cole, but like Ludwig is an absolute star. And then looking at some of the other options that are down here, the guys like Brendan Todd, who are live in this, is going up against Christian Bezadenhout, Austin Eckroat, -120 to Emiliano Grillo. Like these are the ways that Hubbard over Lashley, -130. Like these are the ways that I'll access those guys, as opposed to trying to cash my like 180 to 1 ticket.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's some really appealing options down here. You mentioned Hubbard over Lashley. I'm a big fan of that one. Alex Smalley is a guy that I always have some interest in, and I like that spot for him against Lee Hodges. I do like JJ Spawn this week, but I still think CT Pan's the direction that I would go in that matchup. We haven't talked about these guys at all, and maybe the best context is for the matchup markets to have a very brief discussion on these guys. But like, if I gave you Scheffler, Rahm, and Rory, who do you feel is most likely to win this golf tournament?
I mean, I still think it's Scotty Scheffler.
Me too. I agree.
I mean, I know that this has been beaten into everyone's brains for the last 12 months. And even, I mean, he's at like 15 top 12s in a row, and he is doing it in the absolute most sustainable way possible. And he is doing it from tee to green in ways that basically no one ever has. And I know that it's hard to continue to contextualize that week in, week out, month in, month out, but that's where we are. There is just no tournament that has been played this year in which he has not been in the mix. And he doesn't win them all. There's a lot of win luck involved, but he has literally been involved basically on Sunday in like every single event this year.
I mentioned this on the podcast that I did last night, but we have gone from, I mean, he's gained over 7 strokes ball striking in, I believe, 12 straight starts now, which has never been done before. And we are transitioning from Scotty Scheffler is doing things that has never been done before in the strokes gain era into Scotty Scheffler is doing things that I actually don't think will ever happen potentially again, right? I mean, the current run that he's on from a ball striking standpoint is completely uncharted territory. So yeah, I think he's an incredibly, like, I like him in a matchup over Jon Rahm this week. I don't think for either of these guys, they have somewhat similar skill sets. And I don't think that TPC River Highlands is the type of golf course that maybe does the best job of accentuating a player like Jon Rahm's or Scotty Scheffler's skill set the most versus a longer golf course. But Scotty Scheffler has still had, if we're talking about, I looked pretty deeply this week about players' baselines on shorter courses versus longer courses, who raises their baseline on some of these short positional tests versus who has a lot more success on some of the longer courses. Scheffler, I have a lot more faith on keeping his game intact on some of these shorter courses than a player like Jon Rahm, where the discrepancy in the delta between his short iron play compared to the field and his long iron play compared to the field, he loses a bit of his advantage. So I agree. If we're talking matchups and you want to throw down some money on guys that are going to be on television, are going to be at the top of the board. Scheffler's the guy that I would still probably favor over Rory and Rahm.
Okay, well, listen, we've got to talk props. The props are out on PrizePicks, and we will cover the one and done options this week. As mentioned, the last elevated non-major, non-playoff event. So this is one of the ones that they converted that is now massively pursed and lots of money at the top of the board. We're going to continue that conversation, but we're going to do it on the other side.
Andy Lack is one of the nerdiest golf guys that I know, and I mean that as an absolute compliment. His knowledge of course architecture allows him to create some of the most actionable course previews available, and he offers up pure expertise on his own podcast, the Inside Golf Podcast. Twice a week, he offers course breakdowns, DFS, and betting strategy for every PGA Tour event, and he expands the universe by bringing on entertaining and knowledgeable guests who can offer a different viewpoint of the game that we love. Follow Inside Golf Pod on Twitter and download Inside Golf wherever you download podcasts.
And we're back. The props are up. Hat tip to the friends over at PrizePicks for getting this rocking and rolling early in the week. So 2 things up right now. Birdies are better and strokes for round 1. I will tell you, Andy, that the average birdies or better, and this is, again, pretty sticky. TPC River Highlands is pretty sticky year over year. About 3.5 birdies out there per round. So if you're looking at the top options, you're saying to yourself, can Xander gain a birdie to the field? Can Justin Thomas gain a birdie to the field? Those guys are at 4.5. Ricky Fowler at 4. Colin Morikawa at 4.5. It goes up to 5 for Cantlay, Rory, Scheffler, and Jon Rahm. And then the stroke side of things, again, pretty sticky here. Scoring average generally around 69.9. Let's round up, call it 70. That would be even par. So when you look at guys that are at the top of the board, your Schefflers, your Rorys, your Rahms, you're asking them to probably gain 3 shots to the field because their strokes are at 67. You go down, you can get a little bit of value on, 68.5 on Justin Thomas, 67.5 on Colin Morikawa. So that's the starting point. Where do you want to go from here?
I agree that the strokes feel a touch low to me. This is typically a golf course that does tend to firm up as the week goes on, unless we get rain tournament week, which it does not look like we will. So maybe you can see some guys that go out in the morning wave and have some pretty ideal conditions for scoring. But I still think even if you're one of the best players in the world, to gain 3 strokes to the field in a good field on just an average round, that's higher than all of these players' baselines. I would maybe take an over on a guy like Jon Rahm 67.
So,
right.
So
that's probably what I was thinking.
You're looking at it right here where last 36 rounds, none of these guys are gaining 3 or more strokes to the field regularly. Scotty's doing it literally half the time. That's by far the best rate. And this is, like you said, a strong field in which they're going to have to gain probably 3 shots to the field if we are guessing the scoring average correct, which I think it'll be pretty close to that. Someone like a Rory McIlroy has only gained 3 strokes to the field a third of the time in his last 36. Now he's quite consistent and he does it a lot, which is why he's been in the mix. But you're right. Just kind of looking at some of these strokes here, like I think they're too low. I think the 67s are definitely too low. The 67.5 on Colin. I like Colin this week, but that feels a bit much. I think those are low, the 67s, and then also actually the birdies are a little bit low too. Like, can Xander gain a birdie to the field? Like, yeah, like he does that pretty routinely. So I think both of these are low, and the good news is because they are like opposite, like one would be more and one would be, oh no, I guess they'd both be more. My bad. So that you can pile up on these and kind of build a couple of decent little entries.
If I gave you, because these are 2 guys we haven't touched on at all that probably deserve at least a mention for us. If I gave you like a straight up matchup on 2 guys that were quite, we'll say, relevant last week, Wyndham Clark and Ricky Fowler, who do you think's more likely to show up coming off of their weeks at LACC?
Probably Ricky. I
I
mean,
think so too.
it was funny because we were on the first tee. I think I have like a decent beat on Ricky, I think.
Yeah.
I've seen him for a while. I kind of get the personality. I get the game. I get the vibe. We were on the first tee with Rory and Scotty on Saturday. So they were in the second to last group. And Kyle, KP was like, who's like the guy most likely to just shoot like a 75 and eject from this? And I was like, it's absolutely Ricky, like 100%. I think he shot a 74 or something like that.
Right.
Might have been 75, but now Ricky's just right back in it. He is playing great golf. I mean, freaking Wyndham Clark was on like Good Morning America this morning.
He's partying at Delilah in West Hollywood last night.
And listen, I love the guy. I'm stoked for him. The skill set's phenomenal. He's one of the best like advanced metric darlings of 2023, and he's going to be just fine in the future. But the idea that he is going to come out in round one and put together some type of like 2.5 or 3 strokes gain to the field is jarring to me. I'd be very happy to tip my hat and applaud him if he does it, but that seems a bit unrealistic.
Not to get us too sidetracked, but just real quick, if I gave you 0.5 over under Ricky Fowler finishes his career with majors, are you taking the over or the under?
Under.
Really interesting. Okay, I don't. I disagree with you.
There's too many guys, right? I mean, there's like Rory McIlroy has gone 9 years without a major championship, despite being in contention at like all of them. There are just too many guys. There are not enough majors. Even if Ricky plays at this level for the next 10 years, which is very unlikely, he's only going to get 40 more rips. 40 more rips is not a heck of a lot. It's just, I just think, and it's not just Ricky, right? If you gave me a lot of guys and set their line at 0.5, I would take the under. There's just too many guys.
My only pushback would be, do you know that Ricky has finished top 5 at the next 4 major venues that we're going to? Pinehurst, Valhalla. He has a top 5 at Augusta and Royal Liverpool. So each of the next 4 that we're heading to, Ricky has top 5'd at. Yeah. Same with Rory for what it's worth.
And the problem is Rory's going to be there. Scotty's going to be there. John's going to be there. Xander's going to be there. Patrick's going to be like, they're all going to be there. Right. It's just so hard. And when you're out, dude, we were walking around there on Sunday. I don't know how anybody wins anything. It's all so hard. Like, I just don't. Watching Rory burn every edge, watching Scotty be Scotty and try to get himself back in the mix, Wyndham, wobbling. I don't know how anybody wins any of these. Like, it is so hard to win in that moment when you're looking around and you're down to the final 5 holes and everyone's just jockeying for position. I don't know how anybody wins.
It's such a fine line. And our mutual friend, Kyle, did such a great job talking about this in the article that I think he put up for CBS Sports on Monday on Rory, where you just think about all these tiny little moments over the course of a 4-day stretch and how many of those have to break in your favor. These tiny little 50-50 calls, and how many of those tiny little 50-50 calls throughout the course of a 4-day tournament have to break your way to actually be there at the end. And then you multiply that by the fact that there are only 4 of these a year. And it really is such a fleeting, but pretty beautiful way to go about it, right? I mean, I think that's what's so wonderful about the majors is that they do feel fleeting. In the sense that there's only 4 of them a year. So each one feels so majorly consequential. I think under is probably the right call on Ricky too. It's kind of like the NFL with the win totals. It's like, it's easy to take all the overs, but they're actually skewed towards the unders, and the guys who take the unders are generally the ones that make the most money this week. But I agree, if we're working our way back to the Travelers, I think there's a higher chance that Ricky shows up here with a little bit more motivation than Wyndham, but I'm avoiding both of the guys.
Yeah, if you did want to get involved on PrizePicks, we do have a code. It's Rick. There's a link in the description. It'll give you $100 deposit bonus, and you can go and rock these entries and much more. Many sports, and usually they'll come out with fairways and greens and regulation later as the week goes on. Final thing, Andy, before we get out of here, one and done. Our update real quick. So you had Xander last week, which through 36 holes was terrifying to me. I had Brooks Koepka. After the dust settled, you picked up 150K on me, but that is about a $4.5 million gap that I hold on you with, well, I guess we are coming down the stretch here.
We are coming down the stretch here. Brooks with a very quiet T17 at the US Open to Xander's T10. It felt like the gap in play between those two was greater than the 150K that I won. I'm certainly not going to win this little head-to-head matchup that we have going, picking up 100K every week for the rest of the season. So it's time to get busy. But I noticed looking at who I have left, and it's a good thing. Like, the worst thing that you want to do in one and done is get to the end of the season and you realize that you have a bunch of stars left. It's getting pretty slim pickings for me. And you have to consider that after the Travelers, we really have 4 more big time events, right? I would say that obviously the British Open, and then the FedEx Cup playoff events, which I guess there's 2 of. Yeah, so maybe 3, 4 events. So you're probably right where you should be if you have 1 or 2 or 3 stars left.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think there's like 4 big ones left. It's this one, Open, and the first 2 playoff events. Because usually, depending on your one and done, the Tour Championship is not included. So,
right.
Yeah, so four big boys you got to have left. One of them you could probably use a live boy. So 3 left. Early in the week, obviously, but here are the projected site-wide selections from offthepool.com. Tommy Ladd leading the way at a staggering 19% with Harris English, who won this event a couple years ago at 12%. Sahith at 8.4. Tom Kim 7.3. Xander Schauffele rounds out the top 5 at just under 6%. So in a week of $20 million, I'm not sure those top 4 at least, and 5 of the top 6 qualify as superstars, but they are certainly being heavily rostered.
Well, I'll start by saying I really don't want any of that smoke out of the top 3 at the top.
No.
Fleetwood, English, Theegala. I even think there's probably a pretty good chance that somebody has one of Hideki, Lowry, Sungjae left. Maybe Russell Henley too, which I all think are better options to utilize than Fleetwood, English, and Theegala. And I think that you should default to going down the odds board and looking at what the market is saying about these guys, and then seeing who you have left instead of, I think I would be cautious getting caught up in a Harris English at high ownership this week.
How could you conceivably roster Tommy Fleetwood, Harris English, or Sahith in a $20 million purse? How could you conceivably convince yourself to do that? Tommy, whatever, fine, but not at 19%. No. Harris English, sure, plays great, but get out of town. And I mean, what is that like? There's like 2 career PGA Tour victories there. I think they're both Harris Englishes, or I don't know how many. He might have more than that. He might have like 4 because he's been around forever. But like, I cannot conceivably roll one of these guys out in an elevated event. I think just kind of objectively, and a little bit of a spoiler alert. Like, if you have Colin Morikawa, I'm rolling Colin Morikawa out. Right?
Even if you have Matt Fitzpatrick or Tony Finau left. Right? Like, wouldn't you think that those guys at 3% are maybe going to be available for some people? Probably not a ton, but if you have one of Morikawa, Fitzpatrick, or Finau, I don't know what the holdup would be versus if we're talking, Hideki, even like Cam Young at 2% showed some life last week. Like, I'm taking Cam Young at 2% over Harris English at 12%, 10 times out of 10 and twice on Sunday.
I love Russell Henley. Russell Henley is so likely to finish T11 and incredibly unlikely to win this thing.
Right.
And Cam Young, who has not played well, is much more live to win this than Russell Henley is, who has played great. I just like, I think there is the thing that I think people get wrong in one and done is trying to find the value.
Right.
I get it. Okay. You know, you've got to save some guys and you want to be the smartest guy in the room. And you want to be, if you have an expectation of a golfer that is higher than everybody else, that's a good thing. But there needs to be some level of actual win equity. The way you win one and dones is you pile up winners or like top 3 finishes. If you pick the guy who finishes T11 every single week, you are incredibly talented and you have made like not enough money.
Yeah, and it's also game theory too. I think the mistake that people make with one and done is they look at a player like Harris English or Sahith Theegala, who make a lot of sense on this golf course, who have performed really strongly at TPC River Highlands and are very trendy picks this week, right? I mean, I've seen a lot of betting cards that feature one of Harris English or Sahith Theegala, and they fall into the trap of saying, okay, this is a trendy, sneaky option that's a little bit farther down the odds board. I'm going to roll this guy out in one and done, when the reality of the direction that you should be heading in is looking for guys that are probably have a shorter price in the betting market than those trendy options and are coming in at way lower ownership, right? Like, you're probably not going to hear the name Shane Lowry mentioned at all this week on any podcast. Probably not going to hear a lot of Sung JM mentioned at all on any podcast. Maybe if you want to be really bold and you have a JT left at 1%, right? Like, I'm taking JT at 1% over English at 12% if I have both of them left, right? So I think that's the mistake that people fall into, is they look at what other people are doing and they say, oh, this is a sneaky, trendy pick farther down the odds board. Look at me. I can make up some ground in one and done by picking this 70, 80 to 1 guy that probably not a lot of people are going to use. No, that's actually how everyone is thinking. You want to be looking for the guys that are a little bit shorter on the odds board, maybe a more proven player that nobody's talking about. So that's what I would favor. And I know it's late in the season, but like I said, you have one of Lowry, Sungjae, Day, Justin Thomas, all these guys that are objectively better at golf than Sahith and Harris English.
Yes, indeed. So for our purposes, I'm taking a golfer that I've already alluded to and a golfer that you do not even have available. So it'll be Colin Morikawa for me.
Love that. I'm happy to roll out Tony Finau here.
Perfect. Have I used Finau yet?
I would imagine, right?
I've not.
So just real quick.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about looking at the British Open. How many of the, I will call it the big 3 as it regards to live, and maybe it's a big 2.5, depending on how you feel about Dustin Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
But Brooks, DJ, and Cam, have you used all 3 of them heading into the British?
I've used Brooks and DJ.
Oh man, Cam's going to be dangerous at Liverpool. Yeah, I have Brooks left at Liverpool, and I think I like Cam a little bit more than Brooks at Liverpool. So yeah, interesting.
All right, Andy Lack, thank you very much, sir. Available on Twitter at ADP Lack Sports. You can find me at RickRunGood. This has been your betting preview for this week's Travelers Championship. Good luck.